Does the 6700 XT fix AMD's VRAM woes in Star Citizen? Does it perform well at 1080p or 1440p? Lots of very interesting things to get into in this one. Obviously the VRAM stuff, but also the generational difference between the 6000 and 7000 series cards. Let me do a quick catch up for anybody who's not been following this kind of line of inquiry that I've been going down for years now. Every time that I've tested an AMD card that's not the 7900 XTX, let's make that clear, that card, for reasons that will become clear later, was absolutely fine. But every other card that I've tested has just struggled in Star Citizen for some reason. I've tested older cards with 4GB, and then I've tested some newer ones with 8GB, and they all have this issue where they kind of slow down, especially in Lorville. They seem to run out of VRAM and not handle it well at all. Now, I've recently tested the 6600 and the 7600, and they've got the same issue. They've got 8GB of VRAM, but they perform noticeably worse than the 2060 from Nvidia, which has only got 6GB of VRAM. There's slowdown issues, frame drops, it's awful, and these cards are not necessarily to be recommended. You can get around this if you've got one of these cards by making sure you log out the game almost every time you log out the server. It could be a memory leak potentially, or it could be to do with bandwidth. It's quite hard to actually know. But today we're going to kind of solve from one point of view what's going on. The 6700 XT has got 12GB of VRAM, and as you'll see, it does change things. Test setup is in the description, but we're on the 7800 X3D and we've got 32GB of DDR5. Let's just get straight into the VRAM stuff at Lorville. So you'll see here at 1080p, we've got a card that is doing very well. It's matching the 4080 and the 3080, and obviously that is because we are CPU bottlenecked here. The 7800 XT is running out at its max, and those three cards are doing the same. The 6700 XT is actually pretty close to its limit, but it's not quite completely GPU bottlenecked. So great result at 1080p, and obviously the main thing here is that we're not seeing the slowdowns, and so this is the crucial piece of information from this video. With 12GB, this card can cope, and we're not having these frame drops, and you'll see that in the 1% percentile FPS there. It's just nothing like either the 6600 or the 7600. You can get past this frame drop issue on the AMD cards if you get enough VRAM. So this card has got 12GB. There are some variants. I think there's a 6700 without the XT that's got 10GB. That might be borderline a bit close going into the future, but AMD cards often come with a lot of VRAM, and it potentially, as I kind of speculated in the last video, it might be because they know that their cards can't handle running out of VRAM in the same way that the Nvidia cards do. So either way, any cards from AMD that have got lots of VRAM should be fine and won't be affected by this issue, is what this testing is showing us. At 1440p, because AMD do advertise this card as a 1440p type card, you'll see the 3080 is kind of bumping up against the GPU limit, but isn't completely maxed out. But the 6700 XT is fully maxed out there, but 47 is a decent average, and that's pretty playable. It feels quite pleasant, and depending on what you prefer, would I prefer 60 FPS at 1080p or 47 at 1440p? I personally think 1440p looks significantly better than 1080p. Into Art Corp next, another city, and again a really strong result at 1080p, slightly lower than the main two cards there at the top, but again it's pretty good, and we're not seeing any frame drop issues here. And at 1440p, again it's completely sound, the 6700 XT, but again 50 FPS, you take that, it's pretty good. Here is where things start to get, again, quite interesting. As I mentioned in the 6700 video, it seems as though the 7000 series from AMD can handle certain situations better than the 6000 series, and the clouds seem to be one example for that. You'd expect the 6700 XT to be further ahead of the 7600, and again at 1440p it's kind of closer than you might expect, and again as we get through some more of this testing, a picture does start to emerge. Down into the city of Origin, and actually we see that the 7600 actually beats the 6700 XT here. So again, maybe this is the clouds that's happening, or maybe it's the architecture of the 7000 series. It just is better at this sort of scene. But what's interesting is that at 1440p, the 6700 XT jumps ahead again, and this could be memory bandwidth, potentially. We're speculating, but the behavior of these cards is really interesting. Out in space, where we are still GPU bottleneck because the CPU doesn't have to do a whole heap, you'll see that actually the 7600 has pulled in front again in this test, but when you swap it over to 1440p, the 6700 XT comes out in front again. And Again, let's be clear, these frames are all very good and playable. Out in space, you couldn't complain about anything like this, but it is interesting to just observe this interesting behaviour between the 7000 series and the 6000 series. And in quantum travel, this thing that I've been observing for a while now is that the AMD cars, or the older AMD cars, don't seem to handle quantum travel very well. And you'll see here, if you look at this graph, you've got the 6600 really struggling and only matching the minimum spec GPU that I recommend, the 1660. And you'll see that the 6700 XT is matching the 7600. Again, it should be faster. It's a faster card, but it seems as though, whether it's an architectural difference or whatever we're speculating again, the 7000 series just seems to do better in quantum travel. At 1440p, they're exactly the same. We're seeing they're matched basically. So this is a draw between them, and you'd hope for better from the 6700 XT. So there is a lot to pick out from this. First of all, let's just cover the basics. This is a good 1080p card, and even 1440p is pretty adequate. Depending on your CPU, you would probably find that this might match it at 1440p. So I think there's a lot of good things to say about this. And obviously, the major thing is the fact that the 12 gigabytes of VRAM solve the VRAM issue that we've been seeing. So that is really good news. But it does seem as though the 7000 series has some sort of generational improvement over the 6000 series in quite a lot of the game. So it's quite hard to recommend this card when probably for around another £100, maybe the £450 mark or whatever, you pick up a 7700 XT. And that's not, these new AMD cards haven't been that well reviewed. They're not particularly good in terms of their improvement generationally versus the 6000 series in most games. But in Star Citizen, I think you probably make an argument to say that they might be worth the extra money. The obvious elephant in the room is that the NVIDIA cards on the other side don't suffer with these VRAM issues at all, it seems, and so ultimately they might be a better option.